My name is Cynthia Ritchie-Terrell, and I run an organization called RepresentWomen that is focused on looking at the barriers that women face in politics, both as candidates and as elected officials. And then we do a lot of research to figure out what are the best practices, what are the strategies to address those barriers that women face in politics. And the premise of that work is what really grounds my excitement about this partnership that we are developing with now New Majority New York City and Jessica Holler, because we are excited to work on the ground with people who have made such a difference in the United States and politics here in New York City for electing more women. So just hear from Jessica in a minute, and I'm super excited about that. So I want to thank the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation and Tisha and the fabulous people who helped everybody get up here. My apologies for some of the snafus around registration and so forth. It's always hard coordinating the logistics from different cities that are not in the same place. So I appreciate your patience there, and hope you'll fill yourselves up. It looks like there's plenty of great food. So we have a packed program today. We're going to hear from a number of experts in this field, and then we'll also have time for questions and answers at the end. So I hope you'll jot down things that you'd like to learn more about. You can check out this executive summary of the report that the team at RepresentWomen, thanks to Courtney Lamandola and her team, have worked hard on, that really examined the intersection of public financing, open seats, ranked choice voting, and 21 and 21, and Jessica Holler's work. So we're going to hear next from Jessica, and then we'll hear from some other people around the table. Thanks very much.
Thank you to Rockefeller Brothers and to RepresentWomen for putting this event together. It's very exciting. So a lot of exciting things happened. We did it. We won. 21 and 21 was behind what we've been referring to as the historic win in 2021. In case you don't know, the non-New Yorkers in the room, there are 51 members in the New York City Council, and right now the Women's Caucus consists of 31 women. We have a majority woman council, a majority woman of color council, and a woman speaker. And we celebrated. One of the amazing council members are in the room with us. We celebrated. And then Amelia Adams, who was board chair at the time, said to me, but why did we win? Right? Why did we win? And we were talking about all sorts of democratic reforms that existed in this city. And we were talking about all the wonderful things we did, like provide mentorship and training and networking and access. But I didn't really know why we won. And enter Cynthia, who called me and said, I need you to come and do some ranked choice voting work, because we think ranked choice voting was very instrumental in what happened in New York City. And I asked Cynthia to please, or actually I didn't even ask you, I told you that I was trying to figure out, I told you to do it. I told you I was trying to figure out, why did women win in 2021 in New York City? Is the win extendable over time? Former Speaker Melissa Benrito is going to tell you about why this is possibly not something, extendable over time. Is it extendable over political role, position? We did it in the city council. Can I do it with mayor? Can I do it in the state houses? And is it extendable by geography? Can I take my learnings here in New York and sprinkle this across the country, where we are 60% of the voting population and 52% of the actual population, yet only 30% of the representation nationally? And RepresentWomen took up the charge. And now what we have is researched evidence that shows me that a twin track approach is necessary, but also that authentic gender representation is achievable. It's achievable over time, it's achievable by position, and it's achievable anywhere where you satisfy this dual track approach of democratic reforms and the kinds of support that we bring. And you'll hear today more about those democratic reforms. It also anchored our organization. Strategically, 21 and 21 was really focused on a specific number in a specific year. And after we achieved that, we could have closed up shop and said, mission accomplished, we're on to the next thing. And the strategic question was, Should we continue? Is it possible, and are we needed? And what I take away from this research and report, just so energizing, is that not only can we continue, and this is achievable, we must continue, because we are the other track in the twin track. So this kind of work has enabled us last week to rebrand and relaunch ourselves as the new Majority NYC, with a broadened vision of sustained and growing gender equity in New York City political leadership, and that we're going to know we will have achieved success when New York City maintains parity in elected office for 20 years and beyond. The year 2021 is going to be the year that we got there and stayed, and that's what we are right now. So 21 and 21 brought targeted and directed support to the candidates. And a big part of that support was mentorship, and it's part of the secret sauce. So on that note, I'd like to introduce you to my mentor, co-founder of 21 and 21, and former Speaker of the New York City Council, Melissa Mark Benrito. Thank you.
All right, so good afternoon to everybody. I'm not gonna stand behind the podium. I'll try to be very brief. And I know we didn't do introductions at the beginning. I'm hoping that at some point we can know who's in the room and who do you represent. But I just wanted to just very briefly talk about a couple of things that led to the foundation and the creation of 21 and 21. When I got into the city council in 2005, going back quite a bit, there were about 18 women in the city council. By the time I became speaker in 2014, we were down to 11 women in the council. So when I became speaker, I knew that I wanted to really, as a feminist, as a woman, as believing that representation matters, that I want to focus a lot of energy, right, into figuring out ways that we could change that reality. And so I convened the 11 women council members and said, look, we can't sustain this, right? If we want to be an equitable city, we need to make sure that we are thinking about how do we open the door and have other women come and join, right? And one was immediately to think about ourselves and the fact that we were term limited, a lot of us, and were we grooming, nurturing, helping other women come behind us to run for those seats, but also to think about the vacancies and the opportunities that it created. And at that time, there were only about 3 of us out of the 11 women that really jumped in and said, yes, I want to take this on as a charge. But the other reality was, as we were engaging in the conversations with unions, with decision makers in the city of New York, there was a lot of that's not important kind of conversation, right? We kind of kept raising the issue that we need a gender parity, we need a representation, people of color were the majority, women were the majority, and it was not being reflected in the level of government. And so, despite the fact that there were those who were not very open to this idea that that kind of representation mattered, we still went on and said, we're going to found this organization, we're going to bring this conversation into a public setting and set the table and say, this is not acceptable, what are we going to do about it? And that really was the genesis of 21 and 21. And so we're now at a point, and Althea will speak, one of our councilwomen, we're very proud of that. That's part of that new majority in the council. Now it's new and majority. It was 21 and 21. We don't want to go back. So how do we maintain the reality that we now have before us, right? Where our voices are at the table and the importance of those voices reflecting our lived experiences. And there's no better example of what had overturning Roe v. Wade meant, right? That it is unfortunately predominantly men that are decision makers and making the laws and making policies. And that is why we have a reality that we have. When representation is at the table, representation informs decision-making, informs policies, informs laws and budgets. And and that I think brings greater equity to this table. So the issue here becomes to maintain that reality is about investing long-term. The consistency of investment so that it's not just a one-off, right? And we say, oh, look, hey, we got the majority now, we can walk away. No, we've got to continue to support the women who are now elected so that they can then succeed, but then also that we are cultivating the next level of leadership to come behind them. And that we also hold those that we have helped get elected accountable to say, the door is open, don't close that door behind you. right? What are you doing now to ensure that you are investing, right? You have people you have to hire, invest in women. Make sure that we're having women legislative directors, budget directors, chiefs of staff. That experience matters. They get that experience so that we can have women and women of color, particularly at different levels. So there's that, cycle that all feeds into itself, that you create an ecosystem that nurtures, right, the development of women and helping them succeed. So I'm very proud, but the work of Jessica and the board has really, shot this in a different direction. And the mentorship, right? I was a mentor to many women, but we're going to continue that kind of programming. So I'm proud of the work they've done. And I hope that people here will continue to invest in the new majority. So thank you.
One moment and just acknowledge a couple of our board members in the room, Heidi Seek, Camille Rivera, and Yvette Buckner, our board chair, is just coming in. Right now, I want to invite Councilmember Althea Stevens from my favorite borough of the Bronx, who's also chair of the Committee on Youth Services, to just talk for a couple of minutes on a couple of these points in the twin tracks, just a few of them, that particularly were helpful to her in her win.
Can I talk from here, or do you want me to go up there?
I can hear you if you want to say it.
We're filming.
I project. I worked for kids for a long time. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a very delicious lunch. Smelling like curry in here right now. Yes, we're around here. I see why you didn't stand at the podium. But no, I'm just excited to be here and to really just kind of talk about some of the things that we did in this amazing victory. And like everyone's already said, this work isn't done. This is just the beginning. But I do want to start with the conversation around 21 and 21 and what that meant, right? So my story is I was in youth development for 20 years, never really thought about running or those things. And then the young people that I served literally was like, people do not invest in young people. They don't care about what we're talking about. And I was like, but we still got to be involved. And they told me that I should run for office, right? And so when I decided to run for office, I had no idea where to start. And then I just kept hearing like, have you heard about 21 to 21? Have you heard about 21 to 21? And so that was literally the first indoctrination I had into politics, because that's where I went. They were doing trainings, they were, doing meet and greets. And it really, what it did was develop a sisterhood. So it created space for women throughout the city to just come together, get to know each other, and not feel alone, because like running for office is lonely as hell. So it really created a bond that really strengthened us to come together and work together and really work on our strengths. And it was really instrumental of making sure that we got support and letting us know the process. We got mentors. My mentor that they gave me was already my mentor before, but I wouldn't allow to go with anyone else, which is Deputy Speaker Diane Ayala. And she was also instrumental in working, and also a product of this, right? She was the chief of staff for the speaker and Ms. Mark Benrito, and paying it forward, right? And so it also was like teaching us about mentorship. What does that look like? How are we supporting each other? How are we working together? And my seat was available because I always say we had 1.5 women in the Bronx on the city council, because Diana only had a piece of the Bronx, but Vanessa was the only woman council member in the Bronx, like fully council member. And so for me, it was instrumental for me to keep this seat, because I was running against men. Everyone who was running in my race was men. And I was like, you will not take this seat from a woman. We can't afford to give it up. And so, Vanessa was super supportive of like, no, I want a woman, and I want a woman of color for this seat, and I will not support anyone else. And she was instrumental in standing her ground and making sure that this seat was going to be secured by a woman, because representation mattered. And as you can see, even now, my first piece of legislation was part of the maternity package. And that's something that people have been working on for years, because women and Black women are dying from giving birth, but it was never a priority. It was just not something that we talked about. We don't legislate that. We have other things to worry about. And even the things that have been introduced, if you look, it's always something like holistically. Like women really are about putting together legislation that's holistic, long-term, and really thinking about how do we have wraparound services. And so having this new majority, we're not going anywhere, right? Like, if we're not. I mean, you would clap for that. Because as you guys know, once once you let women in the door, we taking over. So we're not going anywhere. But I think it's just really important that we continue to work in it. And it's all about how do we keep making sure we have a pipeline of young, qualified women. One of the things that I also find when I was running, I could not find a campaign manager that was a woman or a woman of color. And then I was just like, what is happening? No one ever gave us a chance. And so, it's also about how are we making sure that we are developing the next group of leaders and not just elected officials. This is just one step because we need campaign managers, we need strategists, we need chiefs of staff. And how does that look like when you're walking into the room? And so I'm so intentional about who I hire and why I hire them and the look of it because it's important. My chief of staff is a woman. She was also my campaign manager and she had never done it before, right? Sometimes we'll be like, oh, I don't want to take a chance because I've never done it. But guess what? I never did this either, and we're figuring it out, and we're doing a great job at it. But it's important, and so with the new majority, I think also with us is our responsibility and obligation to continue to uplift and support women across the city in all seats. As you guys see, my good friend Assemblymember Jackson is here, and TJ's here as well. But it's important, right? Like even with her, she's a mom, and everywhere she goes, she takes her son because that's important, and we don't see those things. It's like, even when you look at it, women are often asked like, oh, if you're going to run for office, like, what are you going to do? I really literally have people asking me, do you have children? What are you going to do for childcare? I'm like, have you ever asked a man that question? We get it done. We figure it out. That's what we do. And so, it's important for us to make sure that we are normalizing it and making sure that we're speaking up and creating a pipeline. And so I do have to run because I do have a hearing, but it was so important for me to be here because 21 to 21 was my first endorsement. They were the first ones to take a chance on me. They were the first ones to be like, she's going to be a kick-ass city council member. And so it was my obligation to be here to support them.
Thank you, and I just want to acknowledge Assemblymember Jackson. Thank you. I have played with TJ. He's delicious. But yeah, Bronx Power. Next, we went a little bit out of order. I want to invite Nicole Bailey from RepresentWomen to talk us through some of the summary of the research here and the importance of the applicability of this across the country. Thank you.
I'm welcoming you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I first wanted to say thank you for taking the time to come to assemble here. I think that we have really a lot to celebrate. Of course, you all in New York City have a lot to celebrate with this new majority, but also RepresentWomen being able to research and find out why this approach worked. And I'm very happy to present the research findings of my colleagues, Courtney Lemondola and Steph Scotlia. Our research team is one of the best that I've ever worked with. And they are not a fan of public speaking. So I am here on their behalf to represent their findings and to help tell you all why we feel like we had such a win in 21. So one, women are underrepresented in all parts of the United States government. From the local, state, and federal level, there's just not equal representation for women at any level. RepresentWomen's Gender Parity Index shows progress in the United States is slow. This year, we actually have seen that gender parity or gender balance in our lifetime is very unlikely. So it's not only slow, it is slowing down. The 2021 New York City Council election were exceptional. And thanks to Jessica's forethought, she called RepresentWomen to figure out why. Why did this happen? How can we replicate it? What lessons and findings can we take away from this election season? We found that there was a combination of factors that worked well in New York City. One, matching funds. So as we know, there is a huge barrier for anyone running for office that is not wealthy, does not have access to campaign finance funding, or doesn't have access to their personal funding to be able to run for office. So by having municipal matching funds, that enable candidates who are not typically able to run for office to be able to run for office. Oftentimes that is a huge prohibitor for people running for office. Another big factor is term limits. So within the New York City Council, there are term limits. So you don't run into the problem of permanent incumbency, of people who are not rolling off city council, of people that there not being seats available because people keep voting for the same person. The simple fact that you just cannot run anymore is a huge reason why we're able to change the face of the city council. And finally, ranked choice voting created an opportunity, and 21 and 21 seized it. So ranked choice voting allowed people to not only vote for their top candidate, but to say, if this person doesn't win, I have an opinion or a preference for who's next. And by using ranked choice voting, you avoid costly runoff elections, you avoid the infighting and negative campaigning that often happens between candidates when one is pitted against another. And two, you have more fair primaries. So by being able to say, this person was eliminated in the primary, but we already know who the next candidate is, you're able to say that my vote mattered. And even if my candidate was not my top choice, I still was able to have a voice within this election. So those three factors, the combination of factors, really had a huge impact on the wins for the New York City Council in 2021. In the report, we argue that New York City presents the best example of a twin track approach. So by being able to take the multiple approaches of matching funds, term limits, and ranked choice voting, and being able to present opportunities to people who have been previously excluded from running for office, New York City, of course, as you can see from the new majority, was able to really seize the opportunities that were presented with them. The twin track approach is a yes and strategy, in which system strategies like matching funds, term limits, and ranked choice voting are passed first to level the playing field. Then candidate groups can come in and to walk the women through these new systems. So by having the policy in place, that would allow for a more diverse candidate pool, 21 and 21 was able to help women candidates really seize those opportunities. Together, these strategies can accelerate progress towards parity, as we saw in New York City. So these policies are things that can happen across the country. Matching funds are something that is accessible for every municipality to pass. Term limits are something that everyone can pass at various levels. And of course, ranked choice voting, which we're a huge proponent of, and allows for a fair and equal voting system, is something that we have been seeing at not only the local level, but states like Alaska, and hopefully we'll begin to see at the national level, which we do, and the Democratic National Convention uses that. So we are seeing it happening, and we're seeing the effects of it happening. And we know that these strategies, as they are more widely used, will have a bigger impact and allow for us to have more representation. Thank you so much.
So what can we learn, or how does New York help us understand what's going on across the country? And what could we in this room or these conversations ignite for work that needs to be done? Our next speaker is Anna Oliviera, the president and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation, who is part of the funding ecosystem for our organization, thank you very much, in New York City, and connected to so much of this work across the country. Thank you so much.
Everybody, don't need the mic, I guess not, right? Okay, so thank you for having us. We're funders, and I am glad that we're following everybody, or almost everybody, because that's our job. Let me begin by introducing Gisela Manroquin, Director of Programs at the Foundation, who you need to understand makes it all happen. I'm talking about it, but Gisela thinks, works with you, and makes it all happen. So please, before you leave today, if you want to pursue opportunities with us, Gisela and I are here. So I wanted to say three things, like what philanthropy needs to do about this. Okay, that's the first thing. For us, philanthropy needs to follow. Philanthropy needs to be able to recognize leadership, and philanthropy needs to be able to follow. The fact that we have a few dollars, and let me say, the New York Women's Foundation compared to other foundations really does have a few dollars. Even more important, what we do with them, right? More important. We have learned and observed, and today is an example of it, it's a testimony of it, that folks who are living the opportunities and the challenges are creating and telling us exactly what they need. That comes with Melissa's incredible leadership and others in the council creating the future, as you spoke before. That comes with current council members thinking about the next future. It's easy to do our jobs if we actually listen and we follow what people are telling us they need. So that's the first thing I think philanthropy needs to do, is recognize that the knowledge is in the hands primarily of those who are day in and day out occupying the universes that they are solving the issues for. It is not to say that there's not a role for the rest of us. Yes, there is. But we need to be clear what is our added value. So we bring to the table what's not there already, right? The second thing is that the way we look at this is both the specific work, the incredible work of 21 for 21, the incredible, I'm going to say, boldness and confidence of all the candidates. Because that's really important to be recognized. The ones that came before, but also the ones that stepped up this time. And the third thing we need to understand is that we're really good sometimes, we progressive forces, at getting to places, getting to the tables, but not always as good as staying in the tables. Not always as good as leveraging that formal power of governance. The issue of representation is really important because it's about governance. It's about decision-making. It's about steering human and capital resources and policies, and where anything goes is the formal manner of governance of a city, a state, a nation. So it has direct implications to power. It's a form of power, an enormous form of power. We also think that there are things that happen in New York that have been happening that create conditions in communities of color in particular, in communities that are not perceived as abundant in resources, where their resources are more on the human talent than on the financial capital. And that is that community-based organizations, movements, by and for women in New York City are very strong. They're very strong. And leadership emerges and lives where people are. So the third thing that we think philanthropy needs to do is fund that. Both fund the direct organizations and processes that work with what we call enlarging democratic processes, not just protecting democracy, but enlarging democratic processes. And Represent just gave an incredible analysis of what that is, right? 3 or 4 policies that were shifted. So we were not just defending what we had in terms of those practices, we were expanding. But we also have to fund the day in and day out organizing that happens in communities. Why? Because when it comes the time to register people to vote, when it comes the time to get people to listen to others and trust them, the first responders, who are the community-based organizations and movements that are in people's families, in women's lives and communities' lives, are the trusted messengers. So I wanted to say that. Now, 2 things. We began funding 21 for 21 through a particular strategy that we have, which is to respond quickly, which is a strategic discretionary grant. These tend to be smaller grants, but it means that the foundation is interested in supporting it. And then after that, you become a longer-term partner with the foundation, 5 years minimum. So that's what we are. And not only that, but the grants grow in size. So I'm going to offer to my philanthropy colleagues to think about that. General support is very important, not prescriptive support. It goes that if we think that you know what you're doing because you're living it and you're creating the strategies, who are we to be restricting your ability to allocate your resources to produce the results that you need to produce? So that's one thing. Multi-year funding. And let's think about not where we are today, but where folks are telling us they need to be. So we are interested in supporting, and I wanted to say this, I know a council member had to leave, but everybody, our elected officials to not only stay there in their, there's a re-election thing beginning again, to succeed in that, but to be effective, because government has its own mechanisms, let me put it that way, in a neutral word. So you need to figure out, how do we play the game to win, right? How do we support that onboarding and that ability to do that? And how do we do that following what was said before about matching funds? The issue of economic sustainability of our candidates, of our leaders, is not just for people to get to office. It's for people to be able to produce the results that they need to produce. And that continues throughout their whole serving time. Let me end that, the importance of the partnership of philanthropy following. During Speaker Mark Viverito's tenure, New York City did something that not only changed for New York the relationship of government to community, particularly women of color, but also in the country. And that is that because of your approach of listening to community and overtly saying that, a process was created where community members design a strategy by and for young women of color in the city. They mobilize resources in the city budget, new resources. It was not taking away from others to do that, and mobilize new resources in philanthropy that Gisela oversees with a fund increasing, now we are in year 8, increasing the value and the funding for young women of color. We believe that all these things create the political and empowerment ecosystem that is necessary for this kind of tipping point. And I wanted to use that word. We often are hungry to get to the tipping point, but in this case, we got over the tipping point. So not only we want to support our current council members in the case, but we want to support our current council members in this irresistible wave of incredible leadership that has been sparkled in New York. So as a funder, we are really pleased to get your guidance on what we need to do next. I really mean that. And we're also very available to bring other colleagues of ours to listen to you, to learn from you, and to support you. That is our job, is to get philanthropy aligned with you. Thank you for having us. And, onward, let's not set a small limit.
And I want to now introduce one more of New York City Council, one of our New York City Councilwomen, get that out right, co-chair of the Women's Caucus. Another one from the Bronx is in the house today in a big way. Amanda Farias.
Hi, everyone. Hi, so I'm Councilmember Amanda Farias. Hey. I'm really proud to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm told I'm supposed to speak about matching funds and term limits, which I would love to speak about. How I got here, I ran 2 times, first time unsuccessfully in 2017. I came in as the runner-up, only woman, youngest candidate at 26, challenging a 14-year incumbent and 4 other men who thought they were good at this. As they do. And I stuck it through and announced to primary the incumbent in 2019, who a year and a half later chose to not see it through because they ran the numbers and he was not going to win. But instead, he put a challenger up. fully funded him, gave him his entire local infrastructure, which I think, comes into play when we're talking about matching funds. A lot of people would say to me, but you got the old boys club out. Like, you're okay, you're good to go. And really what was happening for me, and I think what happens for a lot of women, particularly women of color who are running in these races, and primarily maybe challenging the status quo or the boys club, whatever you want to call it, is if you don't set a competitive infrastructure around you and you don't have the money to create that competitive infrastructure, it's where there's a lot of tension and where women kind of fall behind. And so fortunately for me, I was an operative before I decided to run for office. And so I took those 4 years in between 2 election cycles to build that competitive infrastructure in my district. And also to make sure I could raise like more than I raised before to build it ahead of time. What I think is important is in our matching fund structure, we have the ability to spend in the outer year and to spend in the inner year. I think what men are really good at is spending in that outer year and getting ahead. It takes women longer to raise that money. So we tend to, as we do in our households, kind of save and plan for the competitive year, instead of seeing as that maybe that 20K, 30K, up to 50K that you can spend on that outer year as getting your 10 steps ahead that you need, because it doesn't go against your spending necessarily, right? So really what I always try to tell candidates when I do provide some sort of advice or mentorship is like, all you need is 22K in your election year. Because when you get that full matching funds, when you meet your thresholds, you'll have the 190 spending cap that you need to remain competitive. And hopefully you would have spended before to kind of get ahead, get your name out with a mailer or lit, get that intro piece out of the way, maybe even build up to petitioning and start knocking doors, things like that, really setting up that infrastructure. So the matching funds is critical in that. What I do think is a lot of folks, where women tend to fall behind on it, or where I think we need assistance, is finding ways to make people want to be treasurers. It sounds very silly, but building your team and opening up your committee is like the scariest part. The first, once I did this in 2017, I had a lot of women over the years and some men ask, like, how do I do this? Like, you did this, you weren't like this political person in the Bronx. Chantal, actually one of them, yes, we sat down together, we filled out all her paperwork, but really it's like this demystification that has to happen. Everyone talks about how to be a candidate, do your stump speech, like all that great stuff. Like get the best headshot, all of those things, but no one's saying there's 4 really critical pieces of paper that you have to fill out correctly the first time, because if not, it delays you opening up your committee, it delays you raising money, it delays C4s from getting involved, right? You really need to have that foundation, that infrastructure in place. So I used to do a lot of that, trying to help out where we can, because that was really where me and my best friend from high school figured out on our own, because I fucked up the paperwork the first time. And I learned the hard way. And I was like, oh, 3 more months to open my committee. Cool. I definitely need the time, right? So I'm really, really doing that. But there's a lot of thresholds that have to be met. And there's a lot of people that are really don't have the full scope of what it is to manage a committee or be a treasurer. I think that's really the first part where a lot of candidates are like, who can do it? Can it be my mom? Yes. Do you and your mom want to talk about money all the time? Maybe not. So like, don't make it your mom, or don't make it your boyfriend, or something like that, right? You want, I mean, how many people do we know, right? Those treasurers. It's like, you want it to be someone that is committed to bookkeeping, understands like what meeting your thresholds are and holding you accountable to them, along with like the first, depending on when you open your committee, and I did with 18 months, the first 9 months or so, it's easy. You're just inputting data, you're, clicking a submission form, but really during the election season is when like every 3 days you're submitting, right? Every time you spend, you have to keep the receipts and all of that. So really, if there's any folks in the room that are interested in doing a treasury track, or like how to be the best treasurer, to meet those matching funds, to make sure, because without that key person, getting to those thresholds is a tough battle. And that 8-1 is like what we really need to remain competitive. And then briefly, I'll speak on the term limit aspect that was really beneficial to me. Though it didn't directly impact me in terms of when I got to run, it was a part of my long-term vision planning for the seat. You know, I came in only because a council member or a group of council members said, hey, your member that you live in right now, we're born and raised in right now, is term limited. And so this is an opportunity where like the scales are kind of leveled in a way. Even though a senator was coming down to run, it was kind of like no one was owed this seat or no one was supposed to be given it, right? And there wasn't a county committee situation where we see in county politics that people are gifted seats, really, because a county committee that's already been chosen, a group of people before choose an elected, right? This was where I could shine the brightest I could and show my district, my community that because this was an open seat, that meant there was an opportunity for change, and an opportunity for a new person. And so with that, I was able to kind of, throw my hat in the ring, for poor use of better words, and jump into a race with a bunch of other folks.
Can I point you, since Althea spoke about 21 and 21, and we have a lot of folks in the room interested in ranked choice voting. And you had a very interesting ranked choice relationship with a specific community in your district. So I'd love you also to touch on that.
Yeah, so RCV was like not the biggest fan, just gonna be honest in this room. It's really difficult when it comes to communities of color and like how we educate people and throwing them into a process. And so that's always my gripe with bureaucracy, even though I'm bureaucracy now, I know. But it's about that education piece and making people feel included in it. And so I have mostly English speakers and Spanish speakers, but also a huge Bengali Bangladeshi community in my district. And so I tried to approach it, one, with having trilingual mail, which looks wild, y'all. Like it's a lot of language. There's a lot of characters of all the languages on a page. So even just in terms of the folks in the room that might be thinking of how to help candidates with beyond a bilingual sheet or a trilingual piece of mail or messaging, like that stuff is really critical. So we did a lot of that. But a lot of folks were like, Amanda's the front runner, right? Like I did it before, I was working really hard. And so I had a group of people in our CV that were actually working against me together to say like, well, she thinks she's walking into this, right? But what I chose to do is say, there are two other folks on the ballot that want to reach the Latino community. And I want to reach the Black African American community, and I want to reach the Bengali community. And so I chose to partner up with them and ask those communities for number 2 or number 3. And so I took a very active approach of reaching out and saying, let's partner up. I know you don't have money. I'll pay for mail. I'll pay for lit. But I need your help in messaging out, right? And so that came with really great translators to make sure the language was right in the right dialect and all of that, because I went through 5 versions, y'all. And it came with really good partnerships, like I had a lot of resources that other folks that were running did not. I had obviously money, I had endorsements. I also had a full food mutual aid network running. So that I did during the pandemic, I just kept going and doing throughout my campaign. But that meant now they were also providing those services to their community. So I took a really proactive approach and engaged that way. And so on election night, even though I was leading, I kind of knew that those communities were going to come through. And I will first and foremost say, like, Black women in my district support me, got my back from day one since 2017. But Black men, like Latino men, you never really know where they're gonna go. So that helps there. And the Bengali community, this was the first time they were able to see themselves on a ballot, right? We had 2 candidates that were from the community that I know they had pride in. So it was not anything to my ego to say like, yeah, put me 2 or put me 3 if you support that person. And they actually really respected from hearing from their candidates that I was willing to put money behind them to help them be elevated a bit too. So, it was definitely the first time that I did this, that anyone was doing it, it was definitely a risk. It felt risky at the time to say, shit, I raised a lot of money and now I'm taking like $25K to put behind 2 other people to hopefully help uplift me in this election. Obviously, in the end, it panned out to serve me well. And we have really good relationships there now. Like, those people really do look to me as someone who is there to serve them, because I didn't put myself before their candidates. I actually lessened myself a bit for them to see themselves on the ballot. So it worked out in that way. It felt very risky at the moment, but also necessary. And hopefully in this new election cycle, for any new candidates that are coming in and want any advice, that's something I've been trying to share often, is you got to be able to sit down and plan and save the money to the side to kind of recalibrate how you might have to respond during an RCV election.
All right.
Thank you.
I think it's time for questions and answers. Unfortunately, Councilmember Stevens had to leave, but we could send messages to her. I'll call Cynthia up to take the cues.
Sure. Yes. I just want to acknowledge 3 RepresentWomen board members. So great to see people in person after a while. So thank you. Amber McReynolds is here from Colorado, but serves on the USPS. She's a board of governors of the United States Postal Service. So if you've got postal questions and ideas and innovations, Dr. Amber.
Perfect.
So also has ideas about best voting equipment for New York City that I know she'd love to talk to people about. And Brittany Stolzberg is also here, fabulous communications person who lives nearby and used to work in the city. And my dear board member, Susanna Welford, who runs a fabulous program called Running Start, which is another great part of this ecosystem of work. So thank you all for being here. And really, I just want to reiterate, I think in the nonprofit world, we often talk about partnerships and we imagine what that might look like, and we put them in proposals for foundations. And yes, we envision what a partnership could be and what the benefits of that would be. But with Jessica and now New Majority New York City, we can really see the tangible results of that, where there's an actual question at hand, what worked for women in New York City, and there are multiple answers, as there so often are. There's rarely just one answer. It's not just public funding. It's not just preparing individual women candidates. It's not just ranked choice voting, though that does align with the data from around the country, I'll just say. And it's not just term limits, but it's this conjunction of things. So super excited to have a real partnership. So thank you for that. And thanks to all the RepresentWomen staff who worked so hard to get this report done and will be continuing in this work. We have a lot of experts in the room, and we have some time for questions or.
Yes,
Lauren, go for it.
I have to leave a little early, so I apologize in advance. I'm Lauren Leader. I run All In Together, which is a national nonpartisan civic education organization. I also am the contributor to Morning Joe on women's issues, so that will be part of the question I'm about to ask you. And then I'm also elected in Westchester County. I'm a local councilwoman in Harrison. I'm the only Democrat. Before I was the only woman. So we got 2 women, they're Republicans. Now I'm always alone in some ways. It's a lot nicer.
Now you're with us.
I will tell you that the culture change with not being the only woman. It's really no one screams at me anymore. It's remarkable. So I did want to ask about sort of some of the more national stuff around ranked choice, because I think, I feel like it's just not getting enough national press, in this time when we're talking about sustaining democracy, and it's a very hot topic. My show talks about it every single day. But I would love to hear a little bit more about what's happening with more movements to get all 3 of these, really: public financing, ranked choice voting, and what was the third one? It's on term limits. Term limit. Oh, God willing, term limit. Let's start with Congress. So I just wondered if you could just speak a little bit about sort of what's are these all locally funded campaigns around the country? Are there some bigger national movements? Just can you fill us in on kind of what you think is coming? Are we going to see this in more places? It's obviously working well here.
We certainly hope so. I'll introduce my husband, Rob Ritchie, who's lurking in the back. He and I founded an organization that's now called Fair Vote 30 years ago, and we've been working on ranked choice voting, and Amber's been super helpful and others along the way. And there's been a lot of momentum, I would say. Over 50 cities now use ranked choice voting. It's used for military and overseas voters in 6 southern states, importantly, because we want to make sure their vote counts. Of course, it's used in 2 states. Notably, Alaska is using it, but Maine is also using it. It's on the ballot in 10 jurisdictions this fall. We were just in the Bay Area and in Seattle meeting with people on the ground who are working to get it adopted in Seattle and in Clark County and in Portland too.
We have New York State.
Yeah, you know, for New York.
Oh, my goodness, so I should, yes. And I think legislation is pending. I think that maybe there are 30 or more bills in state legislature. So maybe you want to speak to the New York City.
State.
Excuse me, that's what I meant. I heard you. Yep.
Not really. I'll hold that.
Okay.
I'll hold for another.
All right.
But there's public match that should be
Coming.
It's coming. Yeah, it's actually supposed to start.
The short answer is I think that RCV is the only one that has sort of organized across the country, thanks right to these guys. The other ones, I haven't heard of a national movement on term limits.
Well, there was a national movement on term limits some years ago, but not a recent one. But would
Term, well, a lot of states already have term limits.
Yeah.
Like I come from a state, well, this is, but the other big one, and I worked with Rob on this, and I just helped Alaska with their implementation, and very similar coalition building by Mary Patola, by the way, to make that happen. The presidential primaries, I think, are the most obvious use case for RCV, and the reason is there's 20 candidates in 2016, 20 candidates in 2020, 3 million voters that voted for Democratic people in the 2020 presidential lost their votes because the candidates dropped out by election day. Like, I think that is unbelievably detrimental to voter trust when you actually took the effort to stand in line in some states, not the state I'm from, but some states you have to stand in line, and to make the effort to vote and to have your vote lost because you chose Kamala or Elizabeth or Amy Klobuchar or whatever it is. So I'd love to see a big movement because we did run RCV in Wyoming, Kansas, Alaska, and Hawaii for the 2020, and Nevada did it too in the caucus. And they're the only states that didn't lose votes to, people didn't lose their votes. So it would be wonderful to see a national movement ahead of 2024, at least on one side or the other, or both. Both would be great. But I think there's a very obvious use case for that, and it's highly needed.
Well, I'll just put the invitation out, like if you want to get this on the political show, I'm happy to help with this, because this is the kind of thing you could get them talking about for half an hour.
Yes.
So we should.
Yes, that sounds like a good deal. Yeah. And I would say, Sarah Palin's comments notwithstanding, it is something that appeals to Republicans and independents and Democrats. Republicans in Virginia use it. Rob works closely with the Republicans in Utah. Republican women are running and winning with it in Utah, in places like Utah County. First woman was elected with ranked choice voting ever serving on the county commission. So it is something with broad appeal, and it's a voter-driven system. Putting voters first, as Amber liked to coin early on, and it really is a nonpartisan. It just it solves a problem that we experience in our elections when more than 2 candidates run. They split the vote, and the reason that's so hard for women and people of color in particular is that we are coming into a system where we don't have representation now. So multiple women and people of color are often running, which we want to have happen. We want to encourage that, and ranked choice voting allows that to happen, and for them to build support, even if they're not gonna win ultimately. Looks like Rob has something.
Just very brief, because I'm going to step out for a second, but one is I think the ranked choice voting movement, and I should acknowledge Maria Perez from Democracy Rising, which does great candidate work around the country and community education. There's a lot of great work being done, a lot of great print press, but it's not in Morning Joe and TV yet, and that's just the next scale. So we definitely are eager for ideas. Before I step out, I just wanted to ask a question relating to term limits, which when they're opening systems up, create great opportunities. 8 years from now, you have a lot of work to do, right? Because all these women that just got elected are termed out, right? And is it, so you have elections in 23, 25 and 29, and then 29 is when the turnover happens. So that just seems like a actually pretty intense
Yes.
set of work to do.
Yes, so let's do it again. Speaker, or Melissa Benrito is our model, which is Diana Ayala was in her office. She was your chief, right?
Deputy chief,
Deputy
12 years out of the 12 years that I was in
And
office.
so the question is, most of the organizations that endorse candidates, right? You fill in the questionnaire, you get the endorsement, they give you a little money, they give you some, volunteers, and then you get into office and they want something from you, or they, right? We endorse you.
And I go, how many doors did you knock?
Right. When the women got into office, even the ones for whatever reason we hadn't endorsed because they came in late we embraced all of them and continued training and engaging and helping them so that when they get there, they were more successful and they're continuing that work. Part of the work now that we want to begin is, who said it? Leave the door open? Someone said that. I did not. We want to work with them on setting it up now, right? The election in 23 is very frustrating. All the incumbents in the city council, because of the census, are up for election. We want now to have everybody thinking about 2, 4, 6 years from now, so that it becomes obvious and that, yes, so those elections will be challenging, but the work begins now. Who in my office, right? Standing up, we made all the women, the organization asked all of the women running, 74 candidates in 35 districts using ranked choice voting, to pledge that when they got to office, there would be gender parity in their staff.
Great.
And we went back and the women did. And we did it out. We made phone calls. The women in the council today have gender parity in their staff. Some of them have 100% women staff. And the men don't. The men don't. Men don't.
Hi, I'm Susanna Welford. Cynthia introduced me. I am the CEO of Running Start. And kind of to your question and what you were just talking about, so Running Start works with high school and college women all around the country to plant the seed that they could give you, that they can run for office. It's something they can do. So, and we've done programs in New York. We don't have a current program. Who's working right now to build that pipeline to get the younger people? I mean, you said you were 26 when you first ran?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Begrudgingly, yes.
Right. But we need people who are 26 to run because, then.
I've gone and yeah, so like Lower East Side Girls Club has a really good political tracking program initiative that they do.
Okay.
Funded by the council.
Yeah, funded by the city council.
Yeah.
New Girl City, it's great. And they engage with the local city council and local electeds pretty frequently. I would even say like Columbia Law, like the Women's Columbia Law, like I've gone and spoken at least a handful of times since I first ran to now. There are college groups that have reached out, I think, to us in different capacities, but from high school to college or middle school and high schoolers, I think it's like on an individual by individual club. Like Beacon High School also, like my first race in 2017, like their entire, they chose me for whatever reason, and they were like, it's you, we want to help. And I'm like, if you want to commute to Soundview, I'll take that.
Also, we have a young leadership council that picks up college graduate. So the idea is sort of you're starting work, and about 15 women, 2 of them have already expressed interest in running for office.
That's so amazing. And can I just say one
sure.
other thing, which is that a lot of people work with college, and we start at age 13 because
Amazing.
Your idea of what you can do and what you're capable of starts so early.
So just 2 things. One is she's my mother's councilwoman, and my mother loves her. And the position.
The check is in the mail.
That's very important. There's 2 stories that I want to talk. Just to answer to your question, there is no program in New York City right now that addresses young people.
I'd like to bring our here in a way.
Right, and to the point that you were making, and I connected to Diana Ayala. Diana Ayala was the chief of staff of Governor, right? Right. And I remember, and I'll tell a story, in Puerto Rico when Melissa was term limited, right? I remember specifically, literally having her sit at a table with her the entire time because she was the speaker. And every time she sat down, she says, do you know Diana? Or, do you know Diana? Diana's important to me. Camille, Diana. And I want to be clear that Diana is a regular woman. She has an amazing story, right? I mean, when she was running for speaker, I was talking to her while she was caring for her mother who was dying, right? Like Diana, if you look at her, she didn't graduate from Columbia or some, grad program, right? She was a woman Latina of color in El Barrio, right? That's who she was, right? And she ran for speaker in the future. And so one of the things that I want to bring up too is the privilege factor about how when we represent people who are running for office, which is why I think when the matching funds and what is now the new majority helped lift up a lot of women who had in many privileged minds, no business running for office, right? Oh, you have a college degree? Did you go here? And I still have it. I'm 43 years old. And they're like, where did you go to school? And I'm like, yeah, get out of my face. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is a conversation around training too, to Amanda's point around mail and treasury and on all these different things that I think that we could offer in terms of like, even if you're thinking about philanthropy, like that is a space. And I think it can connect to 13 and young people, which I think is really important. And then my last piece is on the mail stuff. The other thing is polling and messaging. Latinos, and for example, I'm only using that because we're talking about Amanda's race, right? People don't know this, but multilingual mail drives people crazy. They hate it. And they take the piece of mail and having studied a lot of the polling and they throw it out.
You have a target.
So how do we actually figure out a way to utilize the 190 plus whatever 20,000 you get in the first kind of run to be able to simplify that for our communities to understand? So I think that's another piece that I want to talk about.
Can I jump in really quickly, just short on
and
this?
then Heidi.
I did 47 different push-pull polls during my election. So I bought a phone polling system where I would go, hi, this is Amanda, and I'm calling to see if you care about environmental protection. We're a waterfront community, blah, 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 blah. Press 1 for this, 2 for this. Is it in 3 languages? The first line was always, do you speak Spanish? Press 2, do you speak Bangladesh? Press 3. 47 of those over the course of my election, and then we targeted mail as hyper. If I knew it was going to be 3 languages, I was like, how do I only hit Rochester with this mail, please, right? So 1, save money. So 2, use data-driven metrics of like, how are we're speaking the language of the community. And I think that's right. It's a lot of folks these days want to be on the app that gets the data quite honestly, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for communities of color like ours. Like you have to really go to them. Traditional methods or a campaign that is utilizing both new models of engagement and traditional methodology of engagement is really critical in having a successful and a competitive race, especially if it's a multi-person race.
I want to throw in a question and a discussion about infrastructure, particularly with donors in the room, and I think we lost some folks. But I'm Heidi Seek, I'm the CEO of Vote Pro Choice, and we lost Roe because we failed to invest in political infrastructure over decades. I'm also the former president of the San Francisco Women's Political Committee when we had ranked choice voting, and Team Kamala since day one. And so we collectively used RCV to really take over San Francisco. So what you see now is what we did here back then. So I just couldn't be prouder and I was so honored to be able to do the RCV training for a lot of our 21 and 21 candidates, their campaign managers and their field organizers, to watch their heads be like, oh yeah, and Amanda and I had lots of like conversations about that strategy. And it's just like, it works for particularly women of color who are committed to their communities, right? RCV is like the thing that unlocks their political power because people have relationships to them and all across the community. So it's key. Anyway, my question is, when we talk about this infrastructure that's necessary and philanthropy, how willing do you think donors and investments are going toward more political work? We've done a lot of C3 investment, and it's been a lot of like compliance fears around like, it's got to be C3, it's got to be C3. But honestly, in a post-Roe world, we cannot bring knives to a gunfight right now. Like the Republicans have done so much political infrastructure that's overtly political and partisan. Where are we at? Where do you think we're at?
You mean C4
Collectively.
money?
Yeah, C4 PAC money, like being bold about our C3 education.
Talking about the New York Times piece that came out today.
Well, and I wanted to make that note, like the vote, like for you, and being in the room, the New York Times featured how easy is it to vote, and New York was number 17 because we don't have mail voting. So that's a lot. That's a lot. So lots to They're think in the about. bottom 10 states for turnout.
That's what I was gonna bring this up.
Terrible. In fact,
Terrible.
I usually connect New York and Texas in terms of bad voter process.
That one
Like,
hurts.
amen. Stunning to me. I just love, like, we elected Congress people with like 8%.
Well, you had
25%
What the
turnout in
hell?
this city council election that we're talking about. So I think that one of the investments strategically, clearly, is modernizing and updating voting laws, technology, like the infrastructure of voting, which New York City Board of Elections is not good. I have a ton of ideas about this because I ran elections in Denver for 13 years. But like the system I'm from in Colorado, we had 86% active voter turnout. 80% overall, which includes inactive voters, 86% of active voters. And we have the highest registration rate in the country. So most people are registered to vote. But also, we completely automated the process. You don't ever have to fill out if you go move to Colorado and you go to the DMV, you will never fill out a voter registration form and you will be automatically registered. A mail ballot will show up. And if you change your address to the postal service through the process, the ballot will follow you. So, I mean, literally, you never fill out paperwork. So I'm kind of, I look at New York and I look at 5 hour lines. Like, I think that one of the real opportunities, given the amazing women that are on city council, is to push for a dramatic shift and change in the city, but statewide for sure, because it's a lot left to be desired. It'd be lovely if I didn't have to throw New York under the bus with Texas every time.
Great stuff, thank you.
All right, well, I'm super thrilled to have had this conversation with all of you. Before we all break into small conversations that are about how we can change things like the New York City and New York State election system, which I like the sound of that. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Jeremy for all of your support of this work, and wondered if you could close us out with a few resounding words of support and encouragement.
Cynthia, it is so impossibly daunting to offer these presentations that I'm going to be super brief, also because we're out of time, and maybe just say 2 things. One, thank you to everyone for coming. Thanks to our incredible speakers. Thanks to your leadership at RepresentWomen, at 21 and 21. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I would love to invite you all back here for a meeting 20 years from today to celebrate 20 years of New York, and hopefully historic wins across the country on the model of New York City, which I'm confident you and people in this room will help to make a reality. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we're not going to kick that immediately, so please exchange business cards. Talk to RepresentWomen staff. We have some nice painting cards at the end if you want a little more information about RepresentWomen. And thanks.
I'm sure.
I can do that. Oh my gosh.